Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something we all know, laughter, but maybe in a way you haven't really thought about before.
Hmm.
Our sources suggest it's not just, a reaction. It could be a powerful tool for well-being. We're talking about laughter yoga.
That's right. And we've got some really fascinating material here. We've been looking at a detailed research piece on laughter yoga, specifically in schools and colleges,
Okay.
and also some pretty extensive excerpts from a book summary that goes broader, looking at the benefits, the principles behind it all. And importantly, that summary includes findings from a pretty recent systematic review.
A systematic review. Covering what exactly?
Yeah, it looked at research on humor therapy interventions,
Yeah.
which includes things like laughter yoga for depression and anxiety, specifically studies from 2010 right up to 2024. So quite current.
Okay, got it. So our mission today is to really unpack all of this. We want to understand, why laughter might feel more important now than ever. Dig into the science. How does laughter yoga actually work? Explore the benefits, especially in schools you mentioned, and for mental health.
And then critically look at that latest evidence from the review. What does it really say about how effective it is? And importantly, what are the limitations?
Exactly. We want to give you the key insights quickly but thoroughly,
Yeah.
so you feel really well informed.
You probably think of laughter as just something
Yeah.
that happens, right? You hear a joke, something funny happens, maybe someone tickles you.
Yeah, it's triggered.
It's triggered, exactly. But these sources, they suggest something completely different. That laughter can actually be a proactive practice, something you do.
Like an exercise.
Kind of, yeah, an intentional exercise. And the kicker is, this practice gives you real physical and mental benefits, even if you don't feel like laughing when you start.
Whether you feel like it or not. Okay, that's the core idea we need to explore. Let's dive into these sources and see what they tell us about this and maybe why it's so relevant right now.
Sounds good.
So let's start where one of the sources does, with this really striking contrast. Researchers say that kids, naturally they laugh a lot.
A huge amount.
Yeah, not just a few chuckles. The numbers cited are like in the hundreds of times a day,
Yeah.
sometimes 300, maybe 400 times.
Especially when they're just playing freely with friends, that kind of unstructured play. The sources frame it as just fundamental for them, like movement or play itself. It's just how they express themselves.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting, or maybe a bit concerning, right? The sources say this changes dramatically.
It really does, that sort of spontaneous, frequent, effortless laughter. It starts to fade significantly. And the sources point to a few key reasons why this is happening, rooted in, well, modern life.
Okay, so what are these factors? What's robbing us of this natural giggle, according to the material?
Well, first up, there's the intense academic pressure.
Mm.
The sources are pretty clear on this. Kids are facing highly competitive environments really early on now.
All right.
Sometimes almost from preschool. They're expected to, sit still, be quiet for long stretches, hours, sometimes, which isn't really natural for them.
No.
And there's this constant pressure from teachers, from parents, to meet what the sources call unrealistic goals. High scores, complex subjects too soon, tons of activities.
That sounds stressful.
It creates serious stress, that's the term they use, and it's presented as really detrimental to their health, both mental and physical. It's a big shift away from just natural, playful learning.
Yeah, I can see how laughter gets pushed out when the focus is all on performance and sitting still. What else?
Technology, that's another huge one. The sources use pretty strong language saying technology is robbing children of their childhood.
Wow. How so?
Well, think about the sheer amount of time spent on screens, phones, games, computers, even for school sometimes. This time directly replaces what kids used to do.
Like running outside, playing tag.
Yeah, exactly. Physical activity, spontaneous group play, and crucially, that direct child-to-child interaction. The very things that spark most of that natural laughter, the shared fun, the silliness. It's being blocked by screens.
So less shared physical fun, fewer spontaneous giggles. Makes sense.
Precisely. And then there's the lack of emotional bonding. The sources talk about how modern life pressures maybe separated parents, or parents just working long hours, commuting, maybe even on their own screens a lot.
Right. Less available time.
Less quality time, yeah. So kids might spend more time alone, or just passively supervised rather than really engaged with an emotionally present adult.
And that impacts emotional skills.
Definitely. Skills like empathy and negotiation, just learning to express feelings they develop through close interaction. And laughter thrives in connection, right? If those bonding moments are fewer, the laughter often is too.
Okay. Academic pressure, Technology replacing play, less emotional bonding. What about school itself, the environment where they spend so much time?
That's another key factor. The sources point to a kind of negative attitude towards laughter in many schools.
Negative how?
Well, often in the name of discipline, teachers might tell kids to stop laughing, see it as disruptive. Sometimes kids even get punished for laughing.
Punished for laughing.
Yeah. And when that happens day after day for years, it basically programs them to think laughing isn't okay in certain contexts or that it's not serious behavior. The sources argue this directly chips away at their natural ability to laugh freely as they grow up. It suppresses that joyful expression.
So kids go from laughing hundreds of times a day naturally to environment screens, classrooms where it's replaced, discouraged, or even punished. That's
Yeah.
quite a shift.
It's a huge shift. And then when you look at adults, the contrast gets even starker. The sources estimate adults today laugh maybe, 10 to 15 times a day compared to hundreds for kids.
Wow, only 15 times.
Yeah. And as we get older, we often put conditions on it, don't we? We wait for something really funny or wait until we feel happy enough to let ourselves laugh.
All right, we need a reason. We're not just laughing because it feels good.
Exactly. We wait for permission from the outside world. Like that example in the sources about life in Mumbai, stressful, crowded, people rushing everywhere. It paints a picture where just spontaneously laughing feels difficult, maybe even inappropriate.
Yeah, the environment itself can sort of squeeze it out.
Right. The constant pressures of adult life, work, bills, responsibilities, they often seem to erode that natural joyfulness. We get conditioned to be serious, focused on tasks, and we lose touch with that simple, intrinsic joy. We wait for external validation before we laugh.
So putting this all together, what's the big takeaway here? Why does this fading laughter matter so much, according to these sources?
It matters because it's not just about missing out on fun. It's potentially losing access to a fundamental human behavior that's deeply tied to our well-being, physical and mental.
Okay.
And this loss isn't happening in a vacuum. The sources explicitly link it to rising stress, anxiety, loneliness, things that really mark modern society. So they argue there's this growing urgent need to consciously bring laughter back, to make it a practice. It's almost like a survival skill now.
It really reframes it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not just a reaction, but maybe an essential practice for staying healthy and connected.
Exactly.
Okay, so if modern life is kind of pushing laughter out, how does laughter yoga step in? What's the core idea?
Well, laughter yoga is presented as a direct response to this problem. The idea, pioneered by Dr. Madan Kataria and detailed in the sources, is actually pretty simple, but quite radical in a way. Instead of waiting for a reason to laugh, you just do it. You initiate laughter as a physical exercise.
Okay, but hang on. Does that actually work? If you're just, faking it or doing exercises, does it feel the same? Do you get the same benefits as real laughter?
But this is the absolute key principle, the game changer that the sources really hammer home. Your body, physiologically, doesn't differentiate between real spontaneous laughter and laughter you initiate as an exercise.
Really?
No difference.
In terms of the physiological response, no. When you do the physical act, the deep breaths in, the ha-ha-ha breaths out, the muscle movements your body triggers the same beneficial chemical and physical changes, whether it started with a joke or just because you decided to start laughing.
Wow. Okay.
And that's incredibly powerful, right? Because it means you can tap into those benefits even when you feel rubbish, stressed, sick, facing tough times. You don't need to feel happy first. The exercise itself can help you feel better. You bypass the need for humor.
That completely flips how I think about laughter. It's an action that causes the state, not just a result of the state.
Okay, that's fascinating. Let's get into the science then.
Yeah.
What are those benefits the sources talk about? What's actually happening in the body?
Okay, so there are several big effects. First, a major physiological boost. Laughter exercises involve deep breathing, using the diaphragm. It's not like shallow, everyday breathing.
Right, more like a workout for the lungs.
Kind of, yeah. It flushes out stale air and brings in lots more oxygen. This really boosts oxygen levels throughout your body, especially your brain.
And the brain needs a lot of oxygen.
A lot. The sources mention it needs about 25% more than other organs. So better oxygen means better brain function, better concentration, longer attention span, more creativity, better learning. They even mention this could be helpful for things like ADHD.
Better focus just from laughing. Okay. What about the chemistry? You mentioned chemicals earlier.
Yes, the chemical release is huge. Laughter acts like a catalyst for your endocrine system. It significantly boosts the good stuff neurochemicals like endorphins.
Nature's painkillers.
Exactly. Endorphins plus dopamine and serotonin, those happy chemicals linked to pleasure, motivation, feeling good.
Mhm.
And at the same time, it actively reduces the stress hormones, mainly cortisol and adrenaline.
So more good stuff, less bad stuff.
Precisely. The sources call this combined effect a healing environment in the body. It's a biochemical state that promotes well-being and directly strengthens your immune system.
How does that link to the immune system specifically? How does this healing environment boost immunity?
Well, the sources connect it directly. They state that a weaker immune system underlies a lot of illness. By lowering stress hormones and boosting positive chemicals, laughter helps build resistance.
How? Like what's happening with the cells?
It increases the number and activity of important immune cells circulating in your blood, things like antibodies and key white blood cells. They specifically mention an increase in natural killer cells, or NK cells.
Natural killer cells. They sound important.
They are. They're crucial for fighting off viruses and even tumor cells. So a stronger immune response means, practically speaking, maybe fewer colds, less time off sick from work or school.
Okay, that makes sense. What about immediate feelings like stress and pain? Does it help with those?
Absolutely. Laughter is described as a really effective pain medicine, and one that's free and has no bad side effects.
How does it relieve pain?
Primarily through those endorphins we mentioned, they provide immediate pain relief. But also, when we're in pain, our muscles tend to tense up, right?
Yeah, you kind of brace yourself.
Exactly. And that tension can actually make the pain feel worse. Laughter helps release that muscle tension. Plus, by lowering cortisol and adrenaline, it directly reduces feelings of stress and anxiety, which often make pain feel more intense and can feed negative emotions like anger or sadness. It helps people cope better with chronic pain.
So it tackles the pain cycle from a few different angles: chemical, muscular, emotional. What about other big systems like breathing and circulation?
Big benefits there, too. The circulatory and respiratory systems get a good workout. That deep breathing improves lung function, clears airways. It can help people with things like bronchitis or asthma by reducing mucus and increasing lung capacity.
And circulation.
The physical activity and increased oxygen stimulate blood flow. This can help lower blood pressure over time and generally promotes better cardiovascular health.
Okay. Any other specific health conditions the sources mentioned being helped by laughter yoga?
Yes, they mentioned positive metabolic effects, particularly regarding diabetes. Some reports suggest regular practice can help manage blood sugar levels and balance insulin.
Interesting. Maybe linked to the stress reduction?
That's likely part of it, yes. The overall positive physiological shifts seem to play a role, though more research might be needed on the exact mechanisms.
So we've got benefits for the brain, immune system, pain, heart, lungs, even metabolism.
Yeah.
What about things like energy levels or resilience?
Yeah, the sources include anecdotes about that. People describe feeling much more energy and strength after daily laughter sessions, feeling able to face the day, even a tough work day, with more pleasure.
Like it counteracts burnout.
Exactly. And consistent practice is said to help cultivate a more positive default state of mind. Holding on to a smile, feeling more optimistic even when things are challenging. This builds emotional resilience, better coping skills.
And you mentioned cancer earlier, not as a cure, but for coping.
Right. That's a key distinction. It's not presented as a cure for serious diseases like cancer, but it can profoundly help people cope with the illness by fostering that positive mental state, reducing stress, and building resilience during a really difficult time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the physical act, even if initiated, triggers all this. But you mentioned something earlier about getting benefits even without laughing out loud. Maybe someone's too sick.
Yes, that brings us to another really interesting concept from the sources developed by the author, the mind sound resonance technique, or MSRT.
MSRT. Okay, tell me about that. How does that work?
It's essentially a mental exercise. You start by making a sound, any sound, really, then you close your eyes.
Okay.
And you mentally recreate that sound inside your head. But it's not just thinking the sound. The key is to try and feel its resonance, its vibration within your body while just breathing normally.
So you're kind of internally replaying the feeling of the sound.
Exactly. The idea is that by doing this, by focusing on that internal resonance, you can actually program your body to have those same positive physiological and chemical responses associated with laughter, even without making noise.
Wow. So you can trigger the happy chemicals just by thinking about a sound's vibration.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
It can help create those positive feelings internally, helping you cope with pain or distress when outward laughter isn't possible. The author shares a personal story about using it effectively after herniated disc surgery for pain management.
That's quite something. Almost like internal biofeedback.
Kind of, yeah. But the sources do stress it takes practice. MSRT isn't instant. It might take a few weeks of consistent effort to really train your mind and body to use it effectively, but the benefits can be significant. They also mention structuring sounds rhythmically, like chanting or singing, might enhance it.
That idea of training your mind and body, it links to another concept the sources mentioned.
Programming, right? It absolutely does. The sources talk about how we get negatively conditioned by experiences, like maybe developing a fear of authority figures because of bad experiences or holding on to superstitions. That's negative programming.
Okay.
And they argue that practices like laughter yoga, rhythmic clapping, chanting, even MSRT can work as positive programming. By consistently doing activities that generate positive states, you can counteract those automatic negative responses. You're essentially retraining your brain, cultivating a more joyful default setting.
So you're using the body's actions to consciously influence your mental and emotional state.
In essence, yes. Body influences mind, mind influences body in a positive loop. And finally, beyond all the individual stuff, the sources really stress the social aspect.
Connection.
Connection. They say quality of life is much more about relationships than, money or status. And laughter is this universal social glue.
Yeah, breaks the ice.
Totally. It builds rapport, strengthens bonds, and in a world where people feel increasingly isolated, busy lives, technology laughter is presented as a vital antidote. This is where laughter clubs come in.
Tell me more about the clubs.
They're key. They provide a space where people can gather, be playful together without feeling self-conscious, and get unconditional support. People share joys, sorrows. It directly fights loneliness and distress through that shared experience.
So it's not just internal chemistry, it's building community too.
Exactly. It's holistic, addressing the individual and the need for connection.
That focus on connection leads us nicely into how laughter yoga is actually being used out there in different settings.
It does, and one area getting a lot of attention in the sources is schools and colleges. There seems to be a growing awareness among educators about the pressures kids are under, and laughter yoga is being brought into the curriculum.
Into the curriculum, really?
Yeah, the sources even mention it appearing in textbooks in places like India, Japan, even referenced at Cambridge University. So it's moving beyond just a fringe activity.
That's a significant shift. So what are the specific benefits for students, kids, teenagers that these sources highlight?
Well, several things that tie back to those modern challenges we discussed. First, it's seen as key for developing emotional intelligence.
How so?
Modern studies show kids develop crucial social and emotional skills largely through play and laughter. If they don't get enough play, it can lead to emotional imbalances later. Laughter yoga actively brings back that playful behavior. It gives them permission to be silly and connect emotionally.
Okay. And academically. Linking back to the oxygen boost.
Yes, that improved oxygenation directly helps academic performance. Better concentration, longer attention span, better learning, better memory. The sources specifically flag its potential for helping students with things like ADHD, where focus and stress are big issues.
Right, that could be really helpful. What about the stress teenagers face? It's a tough time.
Laughter yoga provides a healthy outlet for handling stress. It helps build coping skills specifically for adolescent challenges, puberty, tricky parent stuff, changing friendships, school pressures, new responsibilities, all that intense stuff. Laughter gives them a regular release valve and helps them approach things with more resilience.
And physically. Any specific benefits for students mentioned?
Yeah, boosting immunity means fewer sick days, less missed school. That's practical. And it also helps build physical stamina for sports and other activities, so it supports their overall physical health too.
So it's hitting academics, emotional well-being, stress, physical health. How are schools actually doing this? The sources mention different ways.
Yes, a few models. One common one is a quick assembly session, just 5 minutes during the morning assembly. With lots of students together, even that short burst can really shift the energy for the whole school day.
5 minutes for the whole school. That sounds efficient.
It does. Another way is in a classroom. Individual teachers using short, like 5-minute laughter exercises. Maybe as an icebreaker or mid-lesson to refocus or at the end of the day before kids go home to send them home happy. Exactly. The sources mention parents noticing their kids coming home laughing and smiling more on days they had these sessions. That's powerful feedback.
Definitely. What's the third way they mentioned?
A dedicated laughter yoga room. This is more involved, needing space and maybe trained instructors, but it allows for longer sessions, maybe 30 minutes for different grades. They can teach the basics, do brain gym exercises, sing, dance, laugh a deeper dive.
And the family's role in all this. The sources touched on that too.
Yes, briefly but importantly. A supportive, present, consistent family environment creates safety for kids to express feelings freely. This fosters joy and emotional intelligence naturally, reinforcing any benefits they get from school programs.
Okay. Now, beyond schools, were there other, maybe surprising applications mentioned?
Absolutely. Really interesting examples, like adaptations for deaf-mute children.
How does that work? Without sound being the main thing.
They use visual cues, physical actions, things like follow the leader movements to initiate laughter, special vocal warm-ups taught using sign language, rhythmic visual prompts.
And the results?
Quite significant, according to the sources. Improved communication, more joyful expression, and interestingly, even some reported improvements in speech clarity and self-expression, maybe from strengthening those vocal muscles.
That's amazing adaptability. What about other age groups? The elderly?
Yes, it's used successfully with the elderly too. It's a good exercise program for those with mobility issues, low impact, but stimulates circulation and lungs.
Any specific benefits noted?
Improved sleep quality, less reliance on sleeping aids, enhanced emotional well-being, and there was that German study mentioned.
Oh yeah, the core muscles one.
Right. It found laughter yoga engaged abdominal muscles more effectively than traditional calisthenics for seniors. Quite surprising.
Definitely. Any other unusual settings?
They mentioned prison settings, using sessions to help inmates release negative emotions, anger, frustration, providing a healthy outlet in a difficult environment.
And all this links back to the laughter clubs we talked about earlier as the community hub.
Exactly. Those clubs are presented as vital. They build community, reduce self-consciousness, encourage adults to be playful again, and offer that crucial support network, fighting loneliness through shared joy. World Laughter Day was even mentioned as a global version of this.
So it's incredibly versatile schools, specific needs groups, seniors, prisons, community clubs, finding its place everywhere.
It seems so, yes.
Okay, we've covered the principles, the stories, the applications. But now let's get to the hard evidence. You mentioned that systematic review focusing on humor therapy, including laughter yoga for depression and anxiety, covering 2010 to 2024.
Yes, and this is crucial because it shifts us from anecdotes to what the broader scientific research, especially clinical trials, actually shows about effectiveness. It gives us a more objective view.
Right, so what's the big picture from that review? What did it find overall about humor and laughter therapies for mental health?
Well, the overall picture is actually quite positive. The review concluded that these therapies are correlated with moderate to large effects on symptoms of both depression and anxiety.
Moderate to large effects. That sounds significant.
It is, and based on that, the review calls them a promising adjunctive treatment in mental health care.
Adjunctive, meaning?
Meaning used alongside or in addition to other established treatments, not necessarily as a standalone replacement, especially for diagnosed conditions.
Okay, that's an important distinction, a promising addition. Let's break it down then. What about depression specifically? How strong is the evidence there?
For depression, the evidence seems pretty robust, quite consistent. The review points to multiple meta-analyses and other comprehensive reviews within that 2010-2024 timeframe that consistently show significant reductions in depressive symptoms after these kinds of interventions.
And this holds true across different groups of people.
Yes, they've seen these positive effects in diverse populations, older adults, cancer patients dealing with the emotional toll, stressed healthcare workers, students. The review connects this back to those mechanisms we talked about, the neurochemical boost, shifting negative thought patterns, the social connection aspect.
And the book summary sources supported this strongly too.
Very strongly. They stated that laughter yoga, specifically because you can do it even when feeling low, has helped thousands overcome even severe depression by giving them a way to physically shift their state.
Okay, so for depression, the research seems quite supportive. What about anxiety? You said the review looked at both. Is it the same clear picture?
This is where it gets a bit more nuanced, less consistent.
How so?
While some studies do report reduced stress and anxiety, the overall evidence isn't as uniformly strong as it is for depression. The review specifically highlights that a number of individual trials they looked at failed to show statistically significant improvements in anxiety measures.
Even when the same intervention did help with depression in the same study.
Exactly, that pattern appeared.
That's really interesting. Why the difference? Did the review or sources suggest why it might work better or more consistently for depression than anxiety?
Yes, a few possibilities were raised. One is just the complexity of anxiety disorders themselves. They're very varied, right? Phobias, panic attacks with intense physical symptoms, generalized worry, social anxiety.
Right, not just one thing like low mood and depression.
Exactly. Humor therapy might be great at boosting positive feelings and shifting mood, which helps depression. But anxiety often involves things like intense physical hyperarousal or deep-seated worry patterns that might need more targeted approaches.
Like specific therapies for anxiety.
Right. Things like cognitive restructuring for worry or exposure therapy for phobias. Laughter might not directly hit those core mechanisms as effectively. Also, the review noted the variability in the research itself makes it hard to compare anxiety results, different laughter protocols, different ways of measuring anxiety. It muddies the water.
So both the nature of anxiety and the research methods contribute. Did the review suggest ways to maybe make these therapies more effective for anxiety?
It did. It suggested combining laughter therapy with techniques that do target those core anxiety processes,
Like what?
like integrating cognitive reframing techniques from CBT cognitive behavioral therapy to tackle the worry patterns, or maybe adding relaxation training or biofeedback to help people manage the physical hyperarousal side of anxiety.
So use laughter for the mood boost and general stress reduction, but add specific anxiety tools.
That seems to be the idea. Create a more synergistic approach for anxiety.
Okay. Now, what about the overall quality of the research in this area? What limitations did the review point out?
It was quite upfront about the weaknesses. Many existing trials are small, often with fewer than 100 people, which limits how much you can generalize.
Right.
They're often done at just one site or location. And many lack the really rigorous methods you want to see, like proper randomization or blinding, where participants or researchers don't know who's getting the real intervention.
Which increases the risk of bias.
A significant risk, yes. Bias in who gets selected, or bias if people expect it to work. And again, that huge variation in what the intervention actually is, how long it lasts, how it's measured, makes it hard to draw firm conclusions.
So, promising findings, especially for depression, but the research needs to get stronger and more consistent.
Definitely. The review calls for bigger, multi-center trials, standardized protocols, so we're comparing like with like, longer-term studies to see if the benefits last.
What else?
Research looking specifically at different types of anxiety, more studies on how it works, maybe using brain imaging, looking at cultural differences, and importantly, using qualitative methods too,
Qualitative.
like interviews.
Yeah, talking to people about their experiences.
Yeah.
What did they find helpful? What were the challenges? That adds really valuable context to the numbers.
Okay, so the research direction is promising, but still needs work, especially for anxiety. Now, the sources also included some critical takes on broader claims sometimes made about laughter yoga, right? To keep things balanced. Yes, and that's important. While the core ideas are compelling and the benefits seem real, the sources did inject some caution about overstating things.
Like what?
Like the idea that just spreading laughter could bring about world peace. While building community and well-being is great, the critique is that this overlooks deep systemic issues. Political oppression, economic inequality that cause conflict. You need to address those structures, not just individual feelings.
So, good for communities, but not a magic bullet for global politics.
Pretty much. And similarly, the idea that just laughing automatically makes you happy, it's maybe a bit too simple.
How so?
Well, while laughter clearly can boost mood powerfully, emotional health isn't just about maximizing happiness, right? It's about navigating a whole range of emotions, finding meaning even in difficulty. The sources reference psychological theories like Fredrickson's broaden and build, suggesting positive emotions like joy are great for building resources, but you still need to deal with the tough stuff too.
So it's a great tool for positivity and resilience, but maybe not the whole story of emotional life or a replacement for dealing with underlying issues.
Exactly. These critiques aren't meant to dismiss laughter yoga at all. All the sources clearly show its value. It's just about perspective. It's a valuable tool, especially adjunctive for some conditions, great for well-being, but maybe not a cure-all for every complex problem, global or personal.
And that nuanced view lines up perfectly with the systematic review's main conclusion, doesn't it?
It really does. The review hammers home that, based on current evidence, humor therapies are a promising adjunctive treatment, especially strong evidence for depression. But
Alex?
Until we have more robust, rigorous research, these therapies should complement but absolutely not replace established evidence-based treatments like CBT, other psychotherapies, or medication for clinical conditions. They're a powerful support, not a substitute for professional care when it's needed.
A powerful piece of the puzzle, then, fits alongside other essential bits for well-being and mental health.
Well put.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. We started with that really striking image. Kids laughing hundreds of times a day, just naturally,
Effortlessly.
compared to adults, maybe only 15 times, often needing a reason. And we looked at why that happens, according to the sources: academic pressure, technology taking over playtime, less bonding time, even schools sometimes discouraging laughter.
And then we saw laughter yoga stepping in as a deliberate response. Based on that fascinating core idea, your body doesn't care if the laughter is real or initiated. You choose to laugh, you get the benefits.
And we unpack those benefits, the science bit. More oxygen for the brain, the release of endorphins, dopamine, serotonin while cutting down cortisol, boosting the immune system, relieving pain, helping heart and lungs, even metabolism. Plus that MSRT technique for internal benefit.
And we saw it in action everywhere. Schools using it to boost emotional intelligence, focus, and stress management. Clever adaptations for deaf-mute kids, benefits for the elderly, use in prisons, and always those laughter clubs building vital community and connection.
Then we got critical, looking at the hard evidence via that systematic review, finding strong support for humor therapies as an adjunctive treatment, especially showing good results, moderate to large effects for depression symptoms.
But also noting the evidence for anxiety is less consistent, suggesting more research is needed, maybe combining it with anxiety-specific techniques like CBT or relaxation.
Right. And we finished with those important critical interpretations, acknowledging laughter yoga as a valuable tool, but keeping perspective, recognizing it complements rather than replaces addressing deeper issues or standard mental health treatments.
The big thread tying it all together from these sources is that laughter, whether it just happens or you choose to practice it, triggers really powerful positive changes. Body, mind, connections. It helps manage stress, boosts immunity, lifts mood, builds bonds.
Which brings it back to you, listening to this, thinking about that kid laughing freely versus the adult waiting for permission. How could you maybe consciously put more playfulness, more intentional laughter into your own life based on these ideas?
Maybe thinking about cultivating joy as an active thing, singing, dancing, playing, laughing on purpose, rather than just waiting for happiness to arrive from outside.
Exactly. It's about creating it, not just receiving it.
Yeah.
And that leaves us with this final thought, really chewing on that core idea that the body doesn't know fake from real laughter.
Yeah.
If consistent practice can actually help reprogram your mind for more positivity and resilience, well, how much of your day-to-day emotional state is actually within your own influence, just waiting for you to kind of start the practice of joy? Could simply choosing to laugh, even when you really don't feel like it, be a surprisingly powerful path to feeling better, feeling more resilient? Something to think about.